Hello and welcome into a brand new episode of the Sports Hub Patriots Podcast. I'm Alex Barth from 98.5thesportshub.com. Joining us today, we've had him on before, but if you're not familiar, it's Justin Melo. He covers the Titans for a number of different outlets, Titan-sized in his bio, so I'll give you that one. And also covers the draft for the Draft Network. So this is going to be kind of a 2-for-1 here today, Justin. I'm excited to have you because obviously, Titans talk very relevant in New England right now with the coaching staff, and the draft is, of course, the draft with the 4th overall pick. So, again, thanks for joining us today.
Oh, pleasure's all mine. Lots of parallels between these two franchises right now, as you said.
So I think we got to start with the coaching staff stuff first because I think most people are probably tuning in for the draft, but there is some good stuff here. Mike Vrabel coming back to New England to be the head coach, was the head coach of the Titans, obviously, between 2018 and 2023. Patriots fans are familiar with Vrabel as a player, but he never coached here. He was never an assistant here, and we've heard a lot about, is he that old school football guy, Dan Campbell sort of mentality, goes to Cleveland last year, talked about the impact that had on him in seeing the value of analytics. Just as a whole, for Patriots fans who didn't follow that Titans team closely, who is Mike Vrabel as a coach? Like, what are his core concepts, his core values leading a football team?
Yeah, I think he's a special person and a special football coach, in all honesty. I think his superpower, if you will, and maybe it wears thin with a couple guys, but for the most part, he finds a way to kind of walk the tightrope of being certainly very hard on his players and very demanding, yet they love him and they love playing for him, right? I think he does a great job holding guys accountable. I would say that's what makes Mike Vrabel special. Is he's hard, he's demanding, he's going to work you to the bone, but for some reason, you still run through a brick wall for him, right? So I think that aspect of it, his ability to cultivate relationships with his players and unique relationships. I think he knows how to approach different players. And at times, he's so good at it that I think he's almost unpredictable. He gets this sort of reputation for being a hard ass, if you will. But then there are times where you'll see a guy fumble a ball and lose it, and you're thinking, oh, he's about to chew that guy out, when he comes to the sidelines. And then it's quite the opposite. He says, hey, it's no big deal. We're going to get it back, kind of thing. So just a guy that does a really good job sort of knowing how to react in the moment, if you will. So I think the Patriots got a very special football coach here.
So, and that's a glowing review, and I'm not saying you're wrong, but I think there are some fans that are wondering, well, if he's such a great coach, why was he available? Can you kind of speak to his ending in Tennessee and why it didn't work out for him there?
Yeah, and I'll put my hand up, and Titans fans know this. Sometimes I get a lot of flack for it, but I wasn't a fan of the decision to let him go. And I think if you look at where the Titans are now, I'm not so sure that they don't regret it themselves. Really, when push came to shove, he was pushing for more power in the building. And I kind of get why. Personally, again, call me biased. I'm someone that didn't like the decision, but here's a guy who, the last couple of years, they weren't very successful as a football team. After, the first couple of years, the general narrative was that they overachieved, and they overachieved because of Mike Vrabel. Now, I think some of that is true. I think some of it's a little overblown. They had a lot of talented football players on the team when they had a good record. When they didn't have a good record, it's because they no longer had good football players on the team. And that was because the GM he came in with, John Robinson, totally botched 3 off seasons in a row, from both a draft and free agency perspective. It was the Caleb Farleys, the Isaiah Wilsons in the first round, the trade for Julio Jones, Vic Beasley, Jadeveon Clowney, Robert Woods, A.J. Brown trade. I can go on and on. He just decimated that roster. And when that happened, they stopped winning football games. So, by all accounts, Mike Vrabel said, well, I deserve to have more power in the decision-making process. He felt he had earned that right, as a guy who took them to an AFC championship game. They were a number 1 seed in the postseason a couple of years after that, won a Coach of the Year award. Well, the owner didn't agree. She's not a fan of a head coach having roster control. She kind of looked around the league and said, that's not the way the league is going. It's becoming a more collaborative league. You're not seeing in a vacuum, if you will, one guy run the entire organization top to bottom. Organizations, they feel, have gotten too big to have a coach run the whole thing. And the Titans still believe in that model. They've of course fired the GM since, but They've got a new GM in Mike Borgonzi, and they've got a president of football operations that has a lot of power. They've got several, assistant GMs and personnel execs, if you will, guys in control of different things. They didn't believe in what Vrabel wanted, which was, I'm going to run the show. I don't quite know how it's set up there in New England, but if I'm reading the tea leaves correctly, he was allowed to bring Ryan Cowden with him. That's who he wanted to be the Titans GM when they went through the process of hiring a GM initially. So it sounds like to me like he's got quite a bit of power in New England. I think, and he also brought Stretch. He calls him Stretch. I think you know who I'm referring to.
John Stryker. So I wanted to ask you about some of these guys because you mentioned him having the power here. It's over a dozen staffers, all but one of their defensive coaches, and obviously he's going to have more impact on that side of the ball. But on John Stryker, he's kind of been referred to as the right-hand man for Mike Vrabel. He's been compared to Ernie Adams, who was Bill Belichick's numbers guy, analytics guy, football mind guy for a long time here in New England. What does he bring, and what is his philosophy? It sounds like he's going to have a pretty significant game day role. What is his philosophy when it comes to some of that stuff?
Yeah, he's going to bring a little bit of everything. Him and Ryan Cowden are going to be Vrabel's most trusted confidants, if you will. And by all accounts, Stretch, Vrabel views him as one of the brightest minds in all of football. That's how he viewed him here in Tennessee. He was certainly in line for a big-time promotion if Vrabel would have stayed here. I think one thing that's interesting, a lot of Titans fans will say, well, he's too loyal. Look what Stretch did when he left. He went over to the Rams with Sean McVay and had a really interesting role there. Again, Sean McVay, one of the brightest minds in all of football. So by all accounts, Stretch will have a big game day role. He'll be Vrabel's right-hand man. All things, analytics, in-game decision-making. That was something that was a little bit of hit and miss in Tennessee at times. When it went well, it went really well. I think everyone remembers the primetime game against the Dolphins in Vrabel's final year with Will Levis, where they went for two, got the ball back, won the game in regulation despite being down. I think it was 14 in the last 2.5 minutes. They were the first team to ever do that. So Stretch is going to be a guy that he relies on for really day-to-day and certainly in-game decisions.
And then Ryan Cowden, front office, so that's kind of a different angle. But what can Patriots fans expect his influence to be?
To be a good foot soldier, in all honesty, for Mike Vrabel. I think he'll play a role in acquiring players that he knows Mike Vrabel wants to coach. Right? They see football; they're very aligned in how they see the game, the type of players they want to acquire. So he'll be a guy that goes out and acquires players that he knows fits what Mike Vrabel wants to do schematically, both offensively and defensively.
I want to ask you about some of the specific coaches. Let's start with Terrell Williams, who was the defensive line coach for a long time in Tennessee. I believe he was named assistant head coach that last year in 2023, right? I was with the Lions last year as a run game coordinator. Now he's here, first-time defensive coordinator. It sounds like Vrabel will maybe call the plays. Not entirely sure on that yet, but Terrell Williams, it will be his defense. How do you feel about him in that role after being a career defensive line coach in Tennessee?
I mean, there's always a little bit of a we'll see when you're doing something for the first time. What I can say is Terrell Williams is a terrific man and a terrific coach, and his players loved him. Guys like Jeffrey Simmons, Dina Kawatri here, they would have ran through a brick wall for him. They were a huge, huge fan of him. Is he meant to be a D coordinator? I guess we're going to find out. I will add one caveat for you. I don't believe Mike Vrabel really called defensive plays here in Tennessee, so that's interesting to hear. He certainly was a guy that had final say and would overrule things on occasion, both offensively and defensively, but he always entrusted that to someone else. Dean Pease when he was here, Shane Bowen when he, of course, was his longtime defensive coordinator as well. So interesting to hear that he might be calling plays there. And maybe that's because Terrell Williams is a first-time coordinator, but the man, the person, can't say enough good things about the D-line coach. Hopefully he proves capable of taking this step up to D coordinator.
It'll be him and Clint McMillan comes as the defensive line coach, who was his assistant. That the Patriots need help there. They were one of the worst teams at getting after the quarterback last year, dead last in sacks. I've heard a lot externally about those guys in terms of player development and getting the most of the players they have and bringing young guys in. Can you speak to that? And do they have like a type? Right, the Patriots are going to be in the business for an edge rusher. There's a lot of guys in this draft, a lot in free agency. You have 280-pound defensive ends. You have 245-pound outside linebackers, right? Who are the kind of players these guys will target, and what does the player development look like?
Well, I thought for the most part they did a pretty good job developing talent here. Harold Landry obviously was a second round pick. It's sort of been a double digit sack guy almost every year. If you're looking for types, I will say Mike Vrabel really appreciated the heck out of Harold Landry. I mean, I'll say this: who doesn't appreciate a guy that when Vrabel was here, at least kind of tailed off since, but was essentially playing 98, 99% of defensive snaps every year when he was healthy. Okay. Rushes the passer, stops the run, drops in coverage. So Vrabel loves guys that can do all of those things. And again, I think from a development standpoint, they had some success with UDFAs. Tier Tart was a big one before it ended really strange between him, Vrabel, and Williams. But until then, he developed really nicely as a UDFA. They had a couple guys that I thought played their best football here. Guys you'll remember, Alex, I know you're a true football guy, that didn't quite live up to pre-draft expectations elsewhere. I'm specifically referencing Mario Edwards Jr. and DeMarcus Walker. Both guys were like second-round picks, didn't really pan out for their original franchises, came to Tennessee, played really high-level ball. I think some of that had to do with what they were surrounded by. A guy like Jeffrey Simmons is so good at commanding attention. But they really thrived in that environment. And you look at a guy like Walker, signed a big contract with the Bears after having a resurgent year in Tennessee, hasn't really been able to replicate that production. Even a Dinoco Autry, who was kind of had always been a good, solid football player, but really reached the pinnacle of his career in Tennessee under Mike Vrabel, Terrell Williams. And again, playing with a superstar like Jeffrey Simmons certainly helps. They like all types. They want guys that can rush the passer, drop in coverage, defend the run. Certainly big physical types. Mike Vrabel certainly wants the football team to embody what his nature is, right? That's hard-nosed ball.
One more on the defensive side. I know he was only with the Titans for a year as a quality control coach, but Justin Hamilton comes in as the cornerbacks coach here in New England. He replaces Mike Pellegrino, who a lot of people here were very high on, and for good reason. He was here for a long time, and the Patriots had a number of good cornerbacks under him, and the player development was excellent. He's stepping into this role for the first time. He had a kind of a minor role in Tennessee, so I don't know how much you can speak to what he brings, but it seems like they're giving him a bigger role here in New England.
Well, not a lot. I'll be honest with you. Both Clinton McMillan, I believe, and Justin Hamilton, they were in lower roles in Tennessee than they are now in New England. I'm sorry?
Yeah, they were.
Yeah, McMillan as well, right? He was assistant D-line coach. Now he's D-line coach. I think all it really tells you is, Vrabel kind of believed in them from the beginning and now believes they have enough experience to be in elevated roles. But, their time in Tennessee was really just about getting their feet wet.
On the offensive side, there's only a couple guys that follow Vrabel over. The big one's Todd Downing, who held a number of roles in Tennessee, was the offensive coordinator at one point. He's going to be the wide receivers coach here. This is a Patriots team that has had bad luck at the wide receiver position, to put it lightly. They haven't been able to develop guys. They've brought veterans in who haven't worked out here. They just haven't been able to establish talent at that position. And Downing is a very wide-ranging resume, but wide receiver isn't on there. Wide receivers coach isn't on there. What do you make of that fit?
Well, the Titans fans who soured on Mike Vrabel, in truth, they soured on him because of his loyalty. And there's probably no better example of that than rehiring Todd Downing, right? As I'm sure Patriots fans know by now, he was arrested for an alleged DUI, returning from a game, I believe it was in 2022, and when he was the offensive coordinator. And probably not related, but Titans didn't win another game that season. And Vrabel was incredibly loyal to him as his offensive coordinator, didn't fire him after the DUI, waited until the offseason after a 7-game losing streak. They went from 7-3 to 7-10, missed the playoffs. That's when he decided to part ways with him. Titans fans certainly chuckled at this one from afar. Now, look, was not a good offensive coordinator in Tennessee. It's not great that, he's been rehired despite the sort of the checkered past, if you will. And it's probably not great that he doesn't have wide receivers on his resume. Now, he's a tight ends coach. He was an offensive coordinator. Could he coach wide receivers? Yes, probably. Could they have probably made a better hire? Yeah, probably. And look, if the Patriots offense isn't good this year, it's not going to be because Todd Downing's the wide receivers coach, right? So at least he'll have a sort of a minimal impact on the offense as a whole. But certainly that's the one hire that kind of made, Titans fans who wanted to see Vrabel go, if you will, that's the one they chuckled out and said, yeah, nothing's changed.
Again, Justin Melo, we're talking to. He covers the Titans for Titans Size. He also covers the NFL draft. So I want to kind of flip gears here. Actually, let's kind of split it in between first. So the Patriots sit at number 4, right? Ryan Cowden, Mike Vrabel running the show. What would you expect them to do if it was still Tennessee, right? What would the playbook say they were doing? And what do you think the value of that 4th overall pick is if they trade it?
Well, they're almost working with a blank slate, right? I mean, they know they've got the quarterback in place. They've got a couple corners, but it's a roster that needs a lot of improvement, in all honesty, and it's probably going to take more than one offseason. I think ideally they'd like to get an offensive lineman there. Certainly you've got the quarterback in place. The O-line, struggled mightily throughout last season. Unfortunately for them, I'm not convinced that there's a lineman worth taking at number 4 overall. Can you trade down, get a couple more picks and take that lineman at, say, 8th or 9th overall? That might be an interesting scenario that I don't think is getting covered enough. If they do stick at number 4, do they deem one of those linemen, like a Will Campbell, worth going that highly? I personally don't think so. One scenario that I don't think is getting enough traction, because, again, I see them working with a bit of a blank slate here, is the D tackle from Michigan, Mason Graham. I haven't seen him mocked enough to them at number 4. You're talking about a defensive-minded head coach in Mike Vrabel, who was, one of his best players in Tennessee was Jeffrey Simmons, a pass-rushing 3-tech. I think Mason Graham is cut from that same cloth. I think he is the third or fourth best player in this class, regardless of position, and they can certainly use a disruptive force up front. I think he's a better player than any of the offensive linemen in this class. So are they going to force O-linemen at 4? Of course, protecting Drake May is the most important thing. That's their best asset. If they go best player available approach, I think Mason Graham is very much cut from that Jeffrey Simmons, Mike Vrabel cloth.
So Mason Graham being the best player at 4, I think highly of him, but especially if they're going to go up front, right? I look at Abdul Carter. And will Abdul Carter be there at 4 is the question. I think Travis Hunter is somebody a lot of Patriots fans are interested in as well. What are your thoughts on those guys falling to 4? And what do you see the Titans doing? Because this kind of all starts with them, right?
Yeah, I'd be pretty surprised if either of those guys are available at 4. I think the Patriots are probably kicking themselves that they won that last game. They'd be number 1 if they hadn't won it. I think the Titans, people are expecting a quarterback at 1, or the conversation sort of split down the middle. I don't think they're going to take a quarterback. I think they're going to take one of those 2 players, either right at number 1, being Carter or Hunter, or through a trade down with the Giants, who are at 3 and are certainly desperate for a quarterback themselves. I mean, if you're the Patriots, I think the only way one of those guys is there at 4 is if you get 2 quarterbacks in the top 3, and that would shock me. The way I know, quarterbacks always rise to the top is the old saying, but I don't think you're getting Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders in the top 3. If you're only getting one of them, then I think the other 2 picks are a no-brainer, are going to be Abdul Carter and Travis Hunter, right? And that would occur before the Patriots come on the board. So I think, unfortunately for them, that number 3 is the sweet spot, because one quarterback maybe goes, and then you're guaranteeing yourself one of Carter or Hunter. But I'd be pretty surprised. Like, I don't see many scenarios where Carter and Hunter are there for the Patriots at number 4.
So then that leaves them with, again, the tackles. Mason Graham, Tet McMillan, I think, is in the conversation as well. You mentioned you don't see either of the tackles worthy of that 4th overall pick. Why is that? And does this go back to the conversation of maybe they're not tackles, maybe they're guards?
Yeah, I don't even know who the second one you're referring to is, to be honest with you, because there's so much nuance between.
I guess it'd be Kelvin Banks by default, but if you don't even think he's in the top 2, that would certainly be interesting.
I don't have Kelvin Banks as one of the top tackles in this class. I think Will Campbell is probably the one it starts with, but I personally see a guard on tape when I watch him. I think
when you watch Campbell,
this tackle class,
or Banks?
I'm sorry?
When you watch Campbell or Banks?
Campbell. I think Campbell's a guard personally. Okay. I think he's going to be a better fit inside than he is at tackle. And I think there's a chance where some of these other tackles rise up the board, because when you have uncertainty, then you get unpredictable results on draft day. I think the tackle from Missouri, Armand Embo, is potentially a top 10 pick. I think Josh Simmons, the tackle from Ohio State, if he doesn't tear his ACL, I think he's in the conversation for OT1, and maybe he's still in that conversation. I think he's a top 10 talent in this draft. So there's a lot of uncertainty at tackle. Like when you talk about Kelvin Banks, I think there's a chance he's a tackle, but I think he's likelier to go like 25th overall than he is to go 4th overall to New England there. So there are a lot of question marks at this tackle class, and I think you're going to get some surprises. Watch out for that Missouri kid and the Ohio State, Josh Simmons. I think they're better prospects than most are giving credit right now.
Simmons is somebody Patriots fans I know have been very interested in, but he is coming off that significant injury from last year. I think it was I don't know if the ACL too, but I think it was the kneecap issue, torn patella tendon as well. Have you heard anything kind of where he's at, his progress returning from that injury and how that will impact his value?
Well, anything you're hearing right now is from his camp, and they're telling you he's on time, which of course they're going to tell you, or that he's on schedule. I mean, the combine will be big, right? We're a couple weeks away. Then you get the medical rechecks and all of that. So we'll know a lot about Josh Simmons' knee before April arrives. But as of now, I think it would probably take him out of the running for number 4 overall, for example. Now, again, this is a roster that needs a lot of TLC. The Patriots, in my opinion, you're hell-bent on protecting the prized possession, which is Drake May. You trade down to like 7, 8, 9. A team like New Orleans might want to come up at 9. Maybe a team like Vegas or the Jets, all those teams potentially in the market to come up, especially if there's a quarterback on the board. Patriots can move down, get a couple extra picks. All of a sudden, you kind of, you feel better about the value, right, of taking an offensive tackle because you're taking one when you got a couple extra picks. You don't mind passing on maybe a better player, for example, like a Mason Graham, trading out of the Mason Graham spot to get more picks and get a tackle at a more appropriate number, if you will. So I just don't see there being a lineman worth taking number 4. If that's what they do it for, in all honesty, my opinion will be that they probably reached for one of them.
To tie it all together here, player acquisition, the Titans, all of that. We know that players will follow coaches, GMs to new stops. Any Titans free agents or maybe even potential trade targets that look like fits for the Patriots? Nick Westbrook-Ikhine is a guy I've always liked. Obviously, the Patriots need receivers. I see you here maybe kind of grimacing. Don't agree on that one. But any names to know from Tennessee player-wise that could be coming to New England?
No, what I was going to say, the reason I'm grimacing is that the Titans don't have a lot of great players that are scheduled. I mean, A, they don't have a ton of great players, and B, they don't have a ton of great players scheduled to hit free agency. Nick Westbrook-Ikhine, certainly a team-first guy. Love the kid, love the player, but not a wide receiver 1, right? Like, I know the 9 touchdowns this year probably lead to some unfair expectations, but you're talking about a guy that's probably not even a wide receiver 2, right? He's an appropriate wide receiver 3, runs all the right routes, really, could play all the receiver positions, really versatile. Of course, Mike Vrabel loved him. They're going to get him in free agency. They've probably got to overpay a little bit. Would the Titans be willing to trade Jeffrey Simmons or Harold Landry? I think those would be one of the ones that would really, really intrigue Mike Vrabel if they were available. I don't know. They've kind of said all the right things, that they believe in rewarding guys on the team. Of course, both of those guys are on big contract extensions, as is. Landry, a potential cap casualty, wasn't super effective this year. They could save some money by cutting him, but it's also not a no-brainer. And edge is already a really big need for them, so they'd be creating a second hole at a premium position where they've already got a hole. So honestly, 50-50, if one of those guys are available, I could see the Patriots going after one of them. The Titans have said they've certainly indicated they are not available, but don't expect them to flat out tell us that they are available. So they're in a deep rebuild. They're going to be patient with this thing. You offer them a pick. I think they'd be tempted to take it for one of them, but there are no easy connections here because the Titans do not have they don't have a lot of good football players who are available this offseason.
Makes sense. They're at the top of the draft, and Patriots fans know that all too well. When you're at the top of the draft, there's probably not too much on the roster. Justin Melo, he covers the Titans for Titans Size. You can also check out his book, Titans of the South. And covers the NFL draft for the Draft Network. Everybody over there at TDN do a tremendous job, massive resource to me. So thank you for joining us. I'll be reading you throughout the process, and hopefully we can have you back down the road to talk more about it.